Thank you very much for attending this session. So today, we'll be talking about re-architecting apps for cloud, the why, how, and so what. Let me introduce myself. My name is Norman Woodard. I am with Accenture, and I am our global Apogee practice lead. I also am part of our Accenture Google Business Group. And so my play, as we call it within that, as far as an offering within that group, is actually dedicated to what we call next-gen app development. This is entirely focused on microservices, APIs, and containerization. App modernization and re-architecting for cloud is what we do day in and day out. So excited to be here today. Let's get started. So we're seeing a paradox. Recently, Accenture did a survey of lots of different CXOs of different organizations, and basically what we found was that there's legacy debt that's inside of our platforms, inside of the infrastructure that comprise a lot of the operating systems and basically your business as you're doing it today within IT. So what does this mean? Well, the good part is you've got data, and there's lots of valuable information that's useful to serve customers, generate revenue, drive new business and innovation. However, the bad part is, and there's therefore the paradox, not able to get access to that data. So as much as, for example, 70% of the C-suite executives that we talked to said that trapped data that's inside those monolithic applications typically is what's severely limiting IT's ability to innovate. In other words, it's keeping them back from being able to move forward. So they can't innovate, they can't adopt new platforms, they're challenged to be able to look at new innovative products and technologies in the marketplace. So this is really hamstringing the ability for IT to keep up with the pace of business. So what does this mean? Well, part of it is that legacy debt is holding them back. Yes, we've talked about that already. But what it also means, and more importantly, is the business is not able to innovate at speed. So what that also starts to create, as a lot of us see, is fragmentation. So business may start trying to do things on their own, try to deviate from IT, and so you start getting lots of discontinuity in services, being able to maintain those services, and also operate or scale those. So technical debt, as we see it, is what I was just defining, the locked-in investments in platforms, technology, development inside those monolithic applications. That's creating, a higher risk of discontinuity. So in other words, more of your systems are going to be apt to break, that cause outages, cause service disruptions, therefore impeding your ability to service not only your enterprise, but also your client base as well. You also have increased complexity. So lots of time and investment into those applications. Lots of data, of course, in there, because that's where you're housing all of your information, both on your customers, your products, your services, and your capabilities. So what that's also doing is that's creating a lock on your data and on what you're trying to be able to carry the business forward on. So therefore, what that leads to is reducing IT's ability to be nimble, be agile, it also affects the ability of IT to be healthy in the respect of being able to provide new services, business continuity, constant uptime, but also create nimbleness and effectiveness in being able to move the services and the capabilities forward in order to innovate at the speed at which business is looking to operate. So when we talk about drivers of app modernization, getting ready to move to cloud, what does that whole aspect look like? What are we talking about? So getting ready to re-architect, move to either containerize and be more nimble inside of the back office, or move to cloud or even hybrid cloud, as we see most of our clients doing today. So drivers of that app modernization, cloud migration, is going to be primarily either kind of the obvious, right? So it's either business driven, so there's business priorities, either new innovation or revenue. There may be cost cutting aspects as well from the business side, or it can be IT driven. So whether it's infrastructure-led technology, legacy end-of-life systems, or drivers to consolidate platforms, licensing costs, other locked factors in terms of driving up the IT budget, so cost reduction being of primal importance, and then also the cost of maintenance, not just in terms of dollars, but also the resources required to maintain those platforms and infrastructure. So, new approach needs to be taken. How do you get started? What does this journey look like? So we're trying to simplify it down, just 3 simple aspects. So first off, let's start with assess. Develop a consistent, measured approach to how you're going to remediate, how you're going to get ready to re-architect your apps, re-architect your infrastructure and your services, and be able to provide that path towards elasticity, scalability, and manageability, essentially. Then use technology. So the best practice as we see it and what we advise our clients, and also, I don't mean just advise, I mean we implement this for a lot of clients day in and day out. Digital decoupling, new way of using an old term, and it's my phrase, so I'll play with it a little bit here, but we've heard digital decoupling, I'm sure many of you have before. What does this really mean? So it's separating out your technology. It's providing an abstraction layer that you don't start from a scratch approach, you're laying on top, and with that, you're providing the infrastructure to be able to decouple your services from your back-end platforms and enable the separation from your apps and your systems of record and your systems of engagement. And then next is going to be evolve. So now it's a matter of, as you start laying that foundation, you move towards, with technology, with the decoupling, you're going to move towards a API-centric, microservices, and containers approach to all of your applications and your services. Now take it to the next step, and that is evolve to where you're making it more elastic. You're making it to where you can expand your services, your capabilities. You've got a framework for managing not only security, but also managing the services, have visibility not only to performance, but also to what data is being passed, how it's being passed, and being able to scale those services so that your infrastructure is servicing your applications, and not your applications being your end customer, but actually driving the use of the data to enable the business. So how do you start? Eliminating and preventing this technical debt. Well, the technical debt starts typically all these investments, as we were just talking about a minute ago. The monolithic application or applications, there can be more than one, right? So talking about CRM, product databases, HR, numbers of different systems, supply chain. You've got multiple that are typically exist in every enterprise. As we've all started evolving, we started with the best in breed at the time. Well, those have, technologies evolved, apps have evolved, and now there's new stuff out. Rate of change that we all experience today. But what this also means is now you need to, as you're looking to re-architect your applications and enable more of a cloud-native ready infrastructure in your approach to your applications, now start taking it to where you're decoupling your services from those monolithic applications, break out those services, break out that data, and expose it to where you can actually access it. Your application developers are able to incorporate those services, consume those into applications far easier, and therefore you're able to create reusable assets rather than constantly creating the same connection, the same interface, the same API or microservice to a number of different applications. So now you're going towards developing reusable assets, and then you've got a basis where you can start creating scalability and be able to manage that approach. So entry points, where do you start? Where does this journey begin? Where do you jump in? Every enterprise is going to be different, and with that, every application is going to be at a different stage in its life cycle. Your business is going to have a different entry point. So where is the business? And I don't mean IT, so I'm separating those out for a second. But IT is going to have separate drivers, so you need to understand what are the factors that are driving them to want to move the application or capability to cloud in this case. Same thing could apply if you're keeping it on-prem. Principles are very, very similar, right? So is it innovation? Are they trying to offer new capabilities, new services? Are they trying to provide business continuity? Is it revenue impacting, or is it cost reduction? What are the business drivers? That's an important factor to understand. And then also related to it from the IT side of the house is assess the current state of the application. Where is it at in its maturity? Where is it at in its evolution? Is IT and business, for that matter, cloud ready? Do you have those, is that support and infrastructure in place? And what are the priority drivers from an IT perspective? Is it cost reduction? Is it infrastructure consolidation? Is it application renewal refresh? Just understanding those, and then from there you can start to begin to figure out, all right, using this framework as you're seeing in front of you, leveraging the aspect, the concept of decoupling, where does it begin to fit together? So now you can pick where is the appropriate entry point, and you start from there. So it's usually understanding these aspects first, knowing that you're going to go towards a digital decoupling, an API, microservice, containerization approach, and then there it starts, okay, so now get into proof of concept. Look at your architecture, proof of concepts on your services, make sure you don't forget about security, and also from the development, how are the services going to be accessed and maintained. So it's important to have all four aspects incorporated into some of those proof of concepts to validate the approach, validate the business goals are going to be met with the approach of the architecture and the infrastructure, and then you start on your way towards going towards implementation. All right, so building blocks. So look at change data capture, right? So look at how data is captured, see how that's going to play into and understand how that's going to affect your infrastructure and your applications. Look at your event-driven architecture. How is what are the events that are going to be driven? What are the applications and platforms that are going to be driving those events? What data needs to be captured, how is it going to be processed, and what is it also going to be triggering? Then you start looking at microservices and your APIs. So what's your API and microservice strategy with Google, and what I enjoy working with very passionately for the last 5 years, definitely Apogee, and then leveraging Istio and Kubernetes. Real strong platforms be able to springboard off and provide this infrastructure on a robust scale. So this is what we do a lot with our clients. And that's ultimately going to lead to an improved user experience. So being able to deliver faster, but also improve that user experience to where they're getting better, more value out of those applications and driving how they're going to be able to not only use the app, but also driving the adoption of the app and the services as well. All right, so with this, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, and he'll walk you through the next steps on how do you start this journey and what's our approach.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So my name is Mamoun Hirzalla. My role with Accenture is primarily leading the solution delivery and architecture for North America. And I have been in the industry for more than 20 years, primarily building custom applications on different architectural styles for a variety of customers and industries. And today, what I'm going to be going over is talk about how we can take the concepts that Norman mentioned and distill them into an approach that's risk mitigated, has been worked out with customers in the past, and then what are the things that you need to watch out for so that when you go implement this type of journey, you are successful and minimize the amount of risk, and hopefully your C-level suite would be impressed by what you have done as part of the process. So let's start talking about the exponential architecture and what does that mean from taking an existing monolith or legacy type of system and trying to modernize those type of systems and get them into a shape where I can fulfill my primary two drivers for building any type of system, whether I want to reduce cost or I want to increase agility and innovation, right? So for the past 20 plus years, these has been the two drivers that driving the majority of the projects that I have worked on, and this is no different. So it's always that question that we have to answer and what type of metrics that we need to put up front to make sure that we are successful as part of the process. And as you can imagine, this is not an easy task. So in order to get there safely, you have to kind of put some kind of baby steps in place so that you can get to that journey in a kind of governed approach so that you can scale later down the road. And if you need to fail, you fail fast as part of agile type of principles. And you adjust based on the results that you have went through as part of the initial steps of that process. And that's exactly what this number 1 showing here. You need to start small, right? And as part of that process, you need to define what we call a proof of architecture, where you can go through these type of processes and you craft out some use cases as part of your domain. You define 1 or 2 use cases that would touch upon many of the systems that you are going to touch. So there are no cutting corners here. The reason we cut corners got us into technical debt, and we got into where we are right now because of that. So as part of your POA, you want to address those hard questions in order to make sure that you don't get surprises down the road, right? So you try to put 2 use cases. You try to touch upon many of the layers of the architecture that you're building, and then you execute, and then you figure out what is the outcome of that execution, and what the things that went right versus things that may have not, and what type of tweaks, enhancements that I need to do as part of the process so that I can get to the latter stages of the process where I can optimize and scale and deliver all of these type of things with certainty and good results as part of the process. So that's really what this thing is all about here, to make sure that we get into these type of steps. I've seen many clients in the past where they go and start hesitating, or things don't go well because there are so many things that they needed to iron out before going and starting anything. And we've seen that pattern, and the way around that is to define exactly what type of objectives that you want to do, and use those guiding principles to, if discussions happen or conflict arises, use these metrics principles to kind of guide you through the process and try to make decisions and move forward. And this is what I mentioned as part of the proof of architecture. So we select the business priorities, what is that we want to accomplish. There are definitely certain business priorities that we want to accomplish. Pick 1 or 2 use case. Start with the high-level architecture blueprint. If I'm going to use microservices, event-driven type of architecture, what are the primary components? What are the primary scenarios? And then start small in terms of your DevOps. I understand that when you go and look at DevOps type of articles, you have these 10, 12 tools that are all integrated in a nicely mature fashion. But is that really what you want initially from the get-go? Most likely not. I haven't seen one customer started with that, right? So you need to start with what makes sense for you. 1, 2 tools to start with. Doesn't have to be perfect. You can start with that, learn the lessons, add additional tools, find the gaps, and incrementally move over until you kind of get to that stage where now I know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. I learned the lessons, and now I can continuous cycle of evaluation and building till you finalize that state where you get into the optimization mode and building at scale and having any factory or setup that you want to do down the road. Now, to talk about digital decoupling in terms of kind of more peeling the layers of the onion, there are 12 steps that we have seen with working with customers. You may merge one step into the other or whatever, it doesn't matter, but the process stays the same, right? Whether it's 10, 12, you have to cover your basis as part of what's needed as part of the digital decoupling. So starting with defining the domains, trying to understand what is it that I want to build, what type of business problem that I'm trying to tackle, what type of issues, all the way down to decoupling the organization and reaching out into a state where things are running in a smooth fashion. So let's take step by step into figuring out what these things mean and how they figure out into digital decoupling. So the first thing I need to understand is what are my logical boundaries, right? If you're an airline company, you have 2 types of models potentially. You have award booking, non-award booking. If you're a bank, you may have commercial banking, retail banking, right? And so on. Every customer knows their primary domains. And what am I trying to focus on? I'm trying to focus on A or B. And then within A or B, what are the priorities that I want to get? If I'm having issues with issuing policies for my customers, it's taken extraordinary amount of time to do that because of my monolith, and then there are certain rules that nobody knows about. Is there something that I can do to fix that? Is that part of my prioritization, my scenarios that I want to tackle as part of the process? And then trying to understand the interdependencies, right? So you probably, at the beginning of the stage, you don't want to pick something where there are so many interdependencies on that type of particular capability, because that's going to complicate your life. Pick something that is not necessarily trivial, but don't go and pick the most complex type of scenario and you're saying, I'm going to start with that, right? So pick something somewhere in the middle. It touches upon many aspects of the organization, and there is value associated with that, and try to start applying domain-driven design into kind of layering down what are the things that I need to do as part of the process, and try to understand those type of things that are interplaying together to deliver that type of capability, so that when I go and start carving out or hollowing out that particular monolith, I understand the ramifications of what that is, right? Then we start looking into the interfaces. So as part of the process, we start looking, if we pick one domain, let's say it's property, and I have different capabilities I want to tackle: underwriting, billing, and policy issuance. As part of the process, great. These are part of the vocabulary that we want to do. And there are certain things that we use. And then we made the decision we want to be event-driven architecture. We start looking at what type of events that needs to be issued as part of the process, right? So we're trying to decouple. We try to put flexible infrastructures in place so that these systems can intercommunicate as part of the process. So as part of this, you start high-level defining the interfaces, identifying the microservices, and identification of microservices can be another thing that you may want to consider. We'll talk about it towards the end, but it's at a high level, you start doing that, and as part of doing that, you also start identifying what type of synchronous, asynchronous type of activities that would need to go with those. You may want to look at the velocity of data changes. You may want to look at, how big the data is. All of these good things that you need to understand about the interface would be required, and you need to find a way to start documenting that as part of the process. And then that's the next step, which we talk about. We now look into the data in more particular detail. Now, it's not enough I talk about these particular attributes and these microservices. I now look at what is the right structure for this type of data. Is that a JSON document that needs to flow between A and B systems? What is that contract starts looking at? And then we start locking into what that contract looks like and finalizing those steps. And once you finalize those contracts, that's what other people within the team, whether it's offshore development or whatever it is, will need to start looking into. And testers may start looking into what type of testing plans they need to create. So that becomes part of what you need to start looking into in terms of governance and making sure that further changes to certain type of interfaces would require some additional steps. So it's not just let's go and scratch that field and put something else here as quickly as we wanted to, right? So that type of activity would need to be checked as part of the process. And then when you start looking at your services and selecting the right building blocks, right? There are many ways that you can build this. You can, whether you use the technology from Google or different providers, each cloud provider would give you certain different type of capabilities. We all know probably Kubernetes is emerging to be the global universal runtime now for all of this microservices type of activities. Functions as service is emerging to be one of those things that lots of companies are discussing and trying to figure out what they want to do. And then there are things related to your infrastructure, how you build your infrastructure as part of the process so that when I go and deploy my code, do I expect that environment to be there, or do I expect to have scripts that go and build that environment for me, and then once I build that environment, that code gets deployed as part of the process? There are different ways to look at that, but these are part of the decisions that you have to make, right, as part of your organization. Some of those decisions may be appropriate upfront. Some of them may become later down the road as you gain maturity and appreciate the level of complexity that would be required as part of those type of activities. And then, it's the selection of the right framework is important as well. Some companies may be familiar with one framework versus the other. Don't force yourself into something just because company X is doing it. If you have certain best practices within your organization that you're comfortable, happy with, go ahead and use that. And everything that has to be selected would need to be rationalized for the process. And then we start looking at, okay, great, I started defining those things. Now we look more into hollowing out the core and primarily using the strangler pattern, right? So trying to be getting things out until some point that monolith does not have any reason to live, and we kind of take things out. Sometimes you may not be able to be as lucky and completely eliminate that monolith for various reasons. You may have to provide some access around those type of activities, but at least you can take that monolith and hollow out, let's say 70, 80, 90% as part of the process. If you're lucky, get to 100% and then continue with that. So that's important thing. And then you start looking at what type of business logic, where would that need to be existing, and what type of capabilities that we start taking out from that monolith. And definitely those are services that you have identified later and business logic that would need to go and live in those type of services that you would need to create. And then we look closely at the events, right? So we start looking at these microservices. They're communicating. We're decoupling. We're isolating. So what is the pattern of communication between microservices? And that's a decision that you want to make. Are you going to allow your microservices to talk to each other, right? And that's a question that we've seen it full cycle 15, 20 years ago. Everybody thought that the crisscrossing mesh of everything talking to each other is not a good idea. We created the bus. And then when the API gateway, now with service mesh, with microservices, we're saying, well, services can talk to each other, right? It's up to you. Everybody has their comfort zone. But if you take that pattern to an extreme, understanding that business code, the logic, if many of these services start talking to each other, you're creating a lot of spaghetti code down the road. So that's just something that, despite what everybody says about this pattern, you can use it judiciously, but don't go overboard with allowing these things happening. And events would be one way to look at it, or isolating the communication as well, another way. And then you want to look at data replication and change data capture, right? So when things happen, when certain state gets updated, are there any type of ramifications on other consumers who may be interested in that state? How are you handling those type of things? Are you handling those through events, or events on a combination of CDC or CDC, or whatever it is that you're doing, right? So these are decisions that you want to talk about, and then you start looking at the variety of the flows that you need to have, whether it's sync, async, fire and forget, or events, truly events, right? Those needs to be there. Not everything will be event-driven. And if you mandate that everything will be event-driven, you will be disappointed, because there will be a time where batch or micro-batch would be required as part of your architecture. So you would have to have certain provisions within your architecture to go figure out how are you going to handle those. What does that mean from security and boundaries perspective, whether I want to enable certain, scenario A or B or C or D, right? So these are important things and questions to understand. And as Norman mentioned earlier, the user experience really is one of these things that would drive many of those decisions, right? Before we go into any of these type of digital decoupling, the objective is to create something cool and fancy and enables me to be more innovative, agile, et cetera. So we typically start with a very nice idea that we employ design thinking as part of the process, and we start ideating, and we come up with a very nice business value that would allow me, based on that type of scenario, if I carve out a piece of it, that would allow me to be a differentiated type of offering with speed to market against my competitors, right? So let those type of decisions kind of dictate what are the things that you need to do, rather than a blanket statement saying everything is event-driven, right? Because there are tendencies for companies or organizations or humans that the herd mentality, everybody is doing this, we follow without necessarily thinking, is that the right approach for me or my organization or my type of scenarios that I want to enable as part of the process. And one of the important things that you need to be aware of is the rest of the architecture, right? As you probably thinking in your mind right now, it's like this is not a trivial endeavor, right? There are many moving parts when you take an existing monolith into a microservice route. Things were much easier. And if anybody says differently, I would disagree with that. Much easier to have one big Java application or whatever it is, that everything happens there. I just do one build, one release, et cetera. Not necessarily a good way to release business value. I would give you that. But if you were to start looking at the microservice route and all of these type of moving parts that you're introducing as part of the mix, you're adding a lot of complexity to the question. So that's something that you have to be prepared for, right? Whether that complexity lies in CI/CD, security, team structure, whatever it is. The management of these services, I used to manage one system, now I have 20 microservices. What do you do with that? I had 5 error codes, now I potentially have 20 error codes, right? All of these things you have to be thinking about, and what does that mean to your organization and your structure. And then we get to the proof of architecture step that we talked about earlier, right? Get these two primary use cases, slice it across many layers of the system, see how this thing would behave, and make sure that you figure out how your team later on would be able to support this type of model, right? And there is the next step where we go industrialize and making sure that we get into automation and all of these type of things once we master the basis. And we expand only as necessary. So that's important because many people think you just grow the team, add more bodies to it, I'll be able to scale. That doesn't work with microservices. Microservices require those fully functional teams where I want to have people kind of with different variety of skills working as one unit. And that has been the best practice for developing microservices, rather than having a team that does A or B or C independently, data, middleware, you name it, right? So you want to make sure that these things are covered as part of the process. And then there are certain kind of metrics in terms of the plumbing, how much time you need to be spending on plumbing versus other things, right? Plumbing shouldn't be taking more than 20%. If you started a project and you're seeing that you're spending more than 20% of your time on lots of plumbing activities, you're going overboard, right? So make sure that you don't, as you're part of initial plan or whatever plans that you put, making sure that those type of things are covered as part of the process. Now, Conway's law, it's something that was coined back in the 1968 timeframe. Basically says organizations tend to create functions or capabilities or systems based on their own infrastructure or their own communication style, org structure, right? So you have websites matching the structure of the organization. And that is not necessarily good for how you want to move forward. You just need to be aware of that and that particular bias that we have as part of building systems in the past. And my objective is to move from, I was working with a company in their middleware division. They had 200 people, just 200 people just to do the middleware. Another like 50 or 60 people just to do data. Another team doing ETL. It's a massive type of organization with more than probably 3,000 people in their IT division, but that gives you an idea, and things moved at a very snail pace as part of that. That will not work with microservices. You want to make sure that you have nimble teams. There are people and brain trust within the team to make decisions. There has to be a common ground somewhere. Not everybody goes doing their own thing, but you would need to make sure that you have that common ground and then give the teams the authority and have the skills within the team so that they can function as a unit that's basically effective and productive at the end of the day. So let's briefly look at GCP view and what that means. So at Accenture, we've seen this problem. We've seen it many times. So we've built some assets around them, and we've built some logical architecture along with additional physical components that goes along with it, and that's what you would see if you were to go and build it yourself. So you would have to go and figure out, okay, I'm doing some type of event hub, which is primarily the bread and butter of these type of systems. And then I have to have certain level of microservices. You have to make the decision, is microservice would have its own database? Are you going to share the databases? Different pros and cons of each one of them. The school of thought, most likely, the tables now are separate, independent, so that you can run your microservices completely independent, scale independently. And independence also means if I deploy that service, I will not impact anybody else, right? So these are part of the things that you need to talk about as you identify microservices, as you make these architectural decisions about microservices, and what is a microservice? What level of granularity of a microservice that you are going to create as part of the process for which particular domain, and what are the objectives, right? So these are things that we have built some intelligence around them. And as part of that exponential architecture, we typically see the pattern of data lake. How many of you have done a data lake or trying to implement a data lake today? Lots of hands. And those who did not raise their hands, you will be, because that's a pattern right now that lots of companies are gaining a lot of business traction value out of that. So the analytics, the AI, the capabilities that you can get out of that, they are significant. And those leaders in the industry know that, right? And they are starting their journeys as part of the data lake. So as part of this, you'll see data lake, AI services on top of that can be invoked through serverless type of capabilities or whatever way you want them to be invoked. right? And then you have the gateway on top to isolate and kind of govern many of those aspects. And then you have your consumers up top, driven by that user experience that you created through design thinking and making sure that I'm going to do that, right? Now, if you translate that to products and constructs, this is how it looks like. And by no means, this is a representative of a slice of a company or any type of assets. All what this is representing is these are options, right? So you see that you have Istio, Docker, Kubernetes, containers, Cloud Run, et cetera, listed there. Cloud Functions as well. Do I really need to go and implement all of that? The answer is no. These are options for you to consider, right? And each one of those would take probably a half an hour discussion to go over the details. But I would encourage each one of you to look at what this thing is all about. And then the major question that also needs to come into is the Event Hub. Are you part of GCP going to use PubSub? And I put Kafka there, even though it's not GCP, but it's coming to GCP through Confluent and potentially other things. But Kafka is also one of those things that you really can't have that discussion without talking about Kafka. And then what are your requirements? You know, things related to indefinite storage or order of messages. Things can be done in GCP, not necessarily out of the box, but you can create around them, right? So we can do that. It doesn't mean that we can't, but there are companies who would prefer certain things to be done in a certain way, and it would be amiss if I don't put Kafka there as part of the Event Hub, right? And then there are the things related to Cloud Functions, streaming, IoT Core, all of these type of activities that you need to do. CDC type of replication, you know, what do you do about them as part of the process? So take that one, look at it, and Apigee, obviously, as part of the API gateway, is one of these core components that would give you a lot of flexibility as part of your architecture. Here's another view of how that may looks like, with additional capabilities flushed out around Apigee as part of the process. So it's really something that not necessarily highly different from what I displayed earlier. It's just something that you need to do. You know, Firestore is one of these newer products that Google released last year. And you know, the model basically does not dictate whether you use database A or B or C. You can use multiple databases, as you can use multiple languages as part of your microservice implementation. So again, what your requirements are, do you use the same database for the read-write view or something different, right? So it's all depending on what you want to do. And if somebody was wondering, where's the marketing slide? This is the one. I promise it's only one slide. It just basically shows we've been there, done that. We have lots of assets, and we can help you. I'm not going to expand on it anymore, but you know, we've been in the business for a long time. We know what we talk about when we talk about that. So let me briefly discuss the so what, right? And I touched upon items of the so what, and that's really you know, if there is the message that we need to take out, it's really considering the so what does that mean for my organization, right? There are many things to take out from this presentation, but governance, for example, and I had that as a little g, actually, but somebody updated it with a capital G, perfectly fine. Little g versus capital G basically means I don't want to be so this is a little g, just for the record. Okay. So capital G basically means you raise the stick of rules, regulations for everything that you want to do. Little g basically means I have rails, guidelines, and I empower you to do anything you want to as long as you stay within the rails. Just a simple analogy as much as that, right? So that's a question that you need to think about as you start creating microservices, as you start creating APIs, how you want to govern them, design time, runtime, right? All of these type of things. As you think about them, design patterns, there are many design patterns that have been established. The command query response separation, reads, writes for microservices, Saga patterns for transactions, no two-phase commit in microservices. So if you have two-phase commit requirements, how can you handle that as part of microservices, right? Events, compensating events, things that you need to consider. Event sourcing, is that something that you would be interested in? Replaying type of things. When state changes and you have some discrepancy, and I can go and repeat all of these things and recover the state at a certain point, right? All driven by requirements. Don't get into the mode of, yeah, people are doing this for everything, and therefore I need to do this. No, absolutely not. There are lots of complexities associated with that, and let the requirements drive it. Yes, keep an eye on future requirements, just so we don't introduce too much rework, but let the requirements drive what is that, right? I talked about service identification and reuse, so that's another thing that you may want to factor in. Yes, independence is great, but I want to make sure that I am at the right level of granularity, and this is going to be a reusable service. If I'm creating a service just for the sake of creating a service that's going to be used only once, you would have to think about that, right, as part of the process. I want to touch briefly on the team structure. So I talked about it as well, but team structure is one of these things that many organizations think that we can just have a microservices team that handles all microservices, right? That is not necessarily the right way to do it, right? So you would want to have the separation between different teams. You can have multiple teams handling microservices, and you have the brain trust in these teams to be kind of nimble enough. It doesn't necessarily mean one way or right or the other way is wrong. If you have a microservices team within your organization and that's working for you, all power to you, right? But if you are starting to look at it from scratch, that would be one of the things to think about as part of the process. The networking, security, and IAM, that's a fundamental question that you have to go through with every GCP implementation, right? You would have to spend a decent amount of time, typically 6 to 8 weeks, 10 weeks, depending on your complexity, the environment, to build the environment in a productionized grade type of fashion. But for that POA, it doesn't have to be that long. I can start very quickly, very fast, in about a week, 2 weeks, put it in a sandbox and go quickly on that while the other environment is being built out in a production grade type of fashion, right? So do two things in parallel that would save you down the road as part of the process. So with that, I will hand it back over to my colleague here. Thank you.
Stay up here with me if you would, Mamoun. All right, so give you a small little case study, examples of some of the things we did and kind of what the results were. I'm not going to go into it in real detail, but basically rising cost, compute time, need to migrate to cloud, more channels being driven, want to have more access channels for consumers as well as partners. So this particular financial institution really was trying to be very innovative, leapfrog ahead of where their competition was, but also really enable more services to get to their end users. And also by end users meant not only consumers, but also their customer care, their data banking, their retail store banking, service agents. So it was really kind of a comprehensive program. They were stymied by having, again, monolithic applications, monolithic infrastructure, if you will. So in other words, legacy, very much slow, wasn't API driven, didn't have reusable assets. Everything was very difficult to not only break out and separate from a services perspective, but also incorporate that data and services into modern digital applications. So overall, surprise, surprise, right? So their compute time went down when they moved to cloud. Yay. There's lots of good benefits here, so I'm not trying to minimize or belittle that. But what I really want to help you focus on is while they became more nimble in their innovation and being able to get services out to the market faster, oh, by the way, that was typically more than 50%. That's significant. So they reduced their cycle time for getting new services out more than 50% and able to roll out multiple services, not just one big project. And oh, by the way, that really increased their revenue as well as their market stance, market positioning, because now they were more prominent, they would have reached more of their end users, and it actually catapulted them up in their standings within their market segment. So what else? Well, security and fraud. They had also, with the new services, new capabilities, they had additional benefits of having better security, more manageable services, and better response to their security penetration and also their security architecture. Downside that they didn't anticipate, it actually took them a while internally to go through their own internal security and regulation process to break out those monoliths. So there were some aspects that they didn't anticipate. They still got business value. They still created that nimbleness. They created that decoupling layer. They used Apogee, and they used containers, and so they were able to achieve those results. But what they didn't anticipate is, again, looking inside the business and aligning business goals, business priorities, and business objectives with IT capabilities and IT's priorities so that they were reaching towards a common goal. Hugely important. So pulling this all together, kind of what I talked about, what my colleague Mamoun talked about, when it comes to re-architecting for cloud, you've gotten a lot of information today. Hopefully it's very useful to you. But really, it comes down to, if we were to simplify it, 3 different areas, right? So enabling growth and agility, enabling that innovation and ability to introduce new capabilities, new services through differentiated and modular core capabilities that you've enabled through cloud-ready infrastructure. Also, you want to address current stability issues. You want to be able to, it will enable you to address not only your current business continuity plan, but also enable a robust infrastructure to where you're going to be able to continue to launch new services without service disruption and be able to compartmentalize when you do have any service or security impacts that you can minimize the overall proliferation of those incidents, right? And then, of course, every IT group and every CIO wants to hear, oh, we're going to reduce costs too. But again, it has to be done in the right way. You could end up spending 3x, 4x, 10x times what needs to be done without the proper planning. So the proper planning is so critical. Little g, setting up the process, but with a big G emphasis on getting it right, do the right planning up front. Don't pass that up. It is so critical to have the right plan, figure out what you need to do, how to get and achieve the goals you're trying to get to, but define those goals more concretely. Don't just let a utopian guidance of a high level, I want to go API-centric. How are you going to get there? What's your microservices plan? What's your support plan? What's your design state, your run state? How are your data stores? What's your services continuity plan going to be? What is that infrastructure supposed to look like? Set that framework in place first, define at a high level, and then without going to the nth degree, don't get into paralysis by analysis, but take the baby steps and start implementing today what you need to, but plan for tomorrow. Key words, all right? So wrapping this all up, digital decoupling, some guiding principles, layering, apply layering to isolate your systems, isolate your approach. Implement appropriate fragmentation. So remove the pieces that are going to cause congestion, going to cause conflicts in your architecture, in your infrastructure, in your applications, but also in your governance process too. As Mamoun said, loved it. Keep with a small g, therefore you're driving adoption of your infrastructure, your systems, and your approach and tool sets that you're putting in place for APIs, microservices, and containers, right? Simplify it. For those of you engineers, I want to keep it simple, stupid, right? Or otherwise. And very important, can't oversimplify that word, not to play on it, but in order to drive adoption, enable self-service, enable your business to get in and develop their own APIs, give them the infrastructure and the capacity and the tool sets and the guidance to have design standards, so you have standardization and development, but of course, so you maintain some visibility, securability, and manageability of those services. Differentiate your services, break them out, and then automate those as well, right? Automate the entire process, incorporate it into your CI/CD process all the way through, and that includes through even your API platform. One of the great things I love about Apogee as a tool set from an API perspective for implementations, because there's so much that you can do leveraging Kubernetes and Istio and then bringing it all together in your CI/CD pipeline with Apogee scripted out to where you can validate even what your security policies are. Hugely important, that automation process. It'll save time and money. It's not a big investment from instilling those processes, developing those capabilities in that automation, so don't overlook that. Cloud, we all know about. Building your intelligence. Building your intelligence to not only monitor performance, but also look at how your data is being used. Look at how your services are being used. Who's requesting what? Who are those end users, so that you can understand where your data and the data requesting is actually how that's driving your business. A very important point in understanding where you need to expand and continue on your design patterns. And then making everything available in real time. That visibility just continues to play on building in that intelligence, leveraging your cloud, and bringing it all together.
Thank you.